All right. So, Patricia, I invited this talk because I really regard you as just having a lot of direct experience and knowledge of these matters. I think the astral plane is something that we hear spoken a lot about, definitely comes up in evolutionary astrology, but it's not one of those topics that many understand, mostly because it's not as accessible and within our reach. So, I just want to start off with what is the astral plane?
Wow, well, just start off with a bang. You know, okay, so I kind of, in my initial understanding of you know, the universe, I came from a theosophical background. So there's a useful model. I'm not going to say I agree with all the tenets, but that was like back in my 20s when I was, really into studying. And theosophy is a blend of Vedantic thought and mystic Christianity and some other stuff thrown in. So, and mystery school. So I think there's some really valuable information there. Um, I mean, the astral plane to me, from that understanding, would be a kind of plane that exists over the mental, emotional, physical, right? Which would be the construct of the ego. And those are subtle planes. They're energetic bodies, right? It's what they often, we have, these different bodies and energetic counterparts to the physical counterpart. So, like we say, there's an etheric body that correlates with the physical and the astral emotional, right? And then the mental causal, and so on and so on. So when we think of astral plane, from that kind of understanding, it's a plane that is very close to the earth plane, and it kind of contains um, well, in regression work, we work with three afterlife planes. So there's the immediate earthbound plane, which kind of contains all of the soul fragments and emotional energy and thought forms,
Hmm.
right? And that would be what we would call the earthbound plane. And so that is part of the astral plane. And then there's an intermediary, what we would call intermediary bardo. And that would be a plane after the astral plane, which I guess from our perspective, we could still consider that astral plane, but it's an entry into the spiritual planes, higher planes. But most of the astral plane, and this is one thing I loved about theosophy, because it said that it's our job to clean up the thought forms and emotion forms that linger in the
Hmm.
astral plane. It's like, going on a picnic and leaving all your garbage there. And we all do it all the time, right? Supercharged thoughts and supercharged feelings, they take form in the astral. And so, about a place has a certain feeling or where tragedies have happened, there's an imprint on the astral plane there, right? Of especially mass traumas. There's an imprint on and you can feel it, or sensitive people can feel it. Even non-sensitive people will most likely act it out, right? Like you can go to a place and suddenly feel angry, right? And if you're aware, you might go, wait a minute, what is that? Or I'm feeling something that's not me, but somebody else would just act it out. And so we see these kinds of repetitions of collective traumas replaying in spaces that you could say geographically, but it also is just kind of free flowing in the astral plane.
So then you'd say, and you speak about there being several planes, but just to highlight two, so we have the physical, that's like the practical dimension of time and space, the things that we're seeing. And then the astral would be, it might be occupying the same space, but does astral plane occupy space in the same way? It's just not seen, or does it not have
Yes.
the same kind of locality to it?
Well, I think it has a locality, the lower earthbound plane, the lower astral,
Mm.
because there's different levels of astral. The lower astral, you could say, has a locality. But it's a combination to me, since we were talking before about Uranus's correlation with this, or Aquarius archetype. To me, it's a combination of Uranus, Neptune,
Mm.
right? and for various reasons that I could get into. So to me, human activity, again, the generation of emotion,
Right. Got
strong
it.
thought, will leave imprints, especially on the lower astral that's very close to the earth plane.
Got it.
So
Now,
you could say
in the
it's
lower,
local, but it definitely is things that have happened in that space have
right,
an echo there.
right, okay. Things like the lower astral plane, is that where we find like leprechauns and like those like fairy creatures, things like that, devas and things of that nature?
I don't know if I would consider those lower astral. Uh, hmm. I mean, I know we make these correlations to
Sure.
them, but anything that's in the unseen worlds, we could say that's in the unseen world. Like you had said, it's omnipresent, it's everywhere. It's accessible to people with sensitivities or however you access those planes. And basically anything can happen in the astral planes, right? Which is why people do medicine journeys, and everybody has maybe some archetypal experience that might be similar, especially if they're guided by a plant, with a spirit, right? Like ayahuasca or something like that, that actually serves as their guide through those planes. But people that have psychotic snaps and have no guide or aren't trained in those planes, I mean, they are people that are flooded with, because they don't have a strong ego structure and that sense of I that filters that. And they, we could talk about dissociative identity disorder, etc., where people are just flooded with personalities and um, thoughts and feelings in different forms of psychosis. That is, in essence, somebody who is showing you what is going on in the astral plane, because they don't have a filter. So back to your question, I mean, to me, fairies and devas are actually of a higher order,
Okay.
right? They're Gaia's spirit. I mean, they are divine intelligence to me. Leprechauns, I don't know where I'm going to put those, but
Yeah.
when you talk about nature spirits, right? They have their own plane of existence, close and imbued in the earth plane, but they are to me a direct manifestation of divine
Oh, that's
intelligence.
beautiful. Okay, cool. So let's bring it to the astrology. Saturn is the seemingly real, but probably the most not real of it all, physical, tangible, time-space experience. So that's anything that's defined and formed. And then we have Jeff Green taught that the astral plane corresponds to Uranus and Neptune. So will you unpack why that is so?
Well, so Uranus, or Aquarius archetype is certainly associated with long-term memory, and long-term individuated memory. So long-term individuated memory is what? The memory of our past lives. So when you hear the New Age talk about the Akashic records, we could say that that's a very Uranian aspect, right? That's a very Uranian kind of that belongs in that archetype. The difficulty to me in the way that I've seen it in my own work, as well as it's backed up by the Vedas and other people who brought us these thoughts and not the New Age, um, is that Akashic record, for example, exists on every subtle body. So
Oh,
every subtle body has its own Akashic record, right? So the long-term memory of your etheric body
mm,
has has all the physical wounds and everything that you had in other lifetimes. It's in that kosha, it's in that shell. So
mm,
the etheric, the astral, the mental, the causal, the buddhic, right? These different planes of being, they all have their own what they call permanent atom
mm,
that retains memory. So there's actually a whole bunch of Akashic records, and we can look at it like when the soul incarnates, it picks up all the it clothes itself in these
mm,
different subtle bodies through your individuated Akashic record permanent atom. and basically picks up where it left off, right? So Uranus, or Aquarius, belonging to that long-term memory, you could say is the totality of, or let's just say it's the function of, it's a divine function that retains experience memory beyond the physical body
Yeah.
in the subtle form,
And
right?
that would encompass, in this case, you're saying it's not just to the astral plane, it's the encompassing of the total individuated memory of the soul.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's different bodies. This is why when Jeffrey talks about the difference between the evolving soul and the evolving ego, right? They are all evolving and they evolve
Mm.
at different rates and they are different planes.
Right. That's actually a really good example tangibly for us to grasp, because I think what often might feel confusing, at least for me, when it comes to this, is it all feels very conceptual.
Mm,
Right. I mean, I can understand the idea of the mental body, right? The emotional body, but it's not as, it's almost speaking about it in terms of Saturn, but it's not Saturn. Like, body is Saturn as far as I'm aware of. I never thought of a body that isn't physical. So, um, I wonder if, where was I going with this? A helpful framework for this is, what was the last thing that you just said? The last words that
well,
you.
you were talking about, let's go back to that, because to me, I see Saturn as a template of a structure of how all of these bodies are held together. So,
Mm.
and I think even using Jeffrey's words, he would say
Oh, I know.
Saturn is the structure of consciousness, right?
Right.
So when we think of Saturn, we think of that as an organizing principle, right? That then condenses, gives form to, gives housing to. Now,
Right.
yes, a
Gives a
body is part
context.
of that, right? You
Right.
know, but to me, the body, I don't know, body to me is very Aries Taurus, right? Taurus, the Venus archetype correlates very strongly to me with the etheric, with the subtle
Oh,
etheric body.
interesting.
Yeah,
Is that
it
because it
correlates,
corresponds as well to feelings? And that's
sensate,
yeah.
sensate,
Wow. Interesting.
right?
Right, because
I
when you're
mean,
having a
in its
feeling,
primal form, in its Taurian rulership, it's sensate consciousness.
right. I love that. Okay. So yeah, this thought is, you spoke about how there's soul development and ego development. And it just occurred to me, this is actually a tangible thing for us to grasp, right? Because we can think of our own spiritual evolution or psychological evolution or maturation as a spiritual being. But then there's very tangible ego development that occurs throughout our lifetime as well. And so, just the framework that you're bringing forward for me that feels helpful is every single of these bodies we can track or kind of speak about it as having its own developmental process. Like, there's um, you speak about cleaning up the astral, so cleaning up the emotional imprints. That's going to reflect in patterns of emotional patterns that we're generating, and that
Absolutely.
can be matured as we grow as well.
Absolutely, yeah. 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 I
Okay,
mean,
so
the subtle bodies, are the energetic counterparts of what we see in 3 dimension.
mm,
So we can say the totality of our ego consciousness is physical body, etheric body, emotions, astral plane, mental causal plane,
yeah,
right? Those three subtle bodies condense into the physical body, right? That is the totality of ego consciousness, right? And then soul. So there's those 3 levels of consciousness: ego, soul, spirit.
mm,
Um, and each is evolving, and then each of those bodies are evolving as well. So you can, I mean, this is where we get into that idea of spiritual bypassing, that you can sit and have a mask of being a really spiritual person, but be churning with a lot of unfinished emotional business or whatever. That occasionally it's good, the mask is going to crack and it's going to come out. And that's not evolution, right? Evolution, and this is, an interesting point to make, because when we were talking about Saturn as the structure of consciousness, um, Saturn, let's talk Cancer Capricorn or Saturn Moon, right? As a pair of archetypes. if we think of how does the human psyche evolve? And we know that healing and evolution is kind of synonymous in this time, right? Because we have access to all of these great modalities and certain amount of consciousness that, you know, used to exist maybe only in the mystery schools, but we have it at our fingertips now. And so evolution of consciousness has a lot to do with the reunification and purification of those subtle bodies. So if you think of Saturn, Moon, or Capricorn, Cancer, one of the interesting things is, you know, as Jeffrey always says, it's observation and correlation. It's pretty, you see it happen when somebody is under stress and they're experiencing some kind of trauma, they regress,
Right.
right? And this is a known psychological fact that the psyche will regress to an earlier undeveloped state, which is when people start to say, you're acting childish.
Right.
Doesn't that sound like Cancer Capricorn to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Saturn, the structure of consciousness, regresses into the lunar terrain, right? Into the lunar unhealed emotional patterns. So it's a natural movement of the psyche that happens when the cracks show, right? Otherwise, you know, we have, this is what we always talk about, this I, you know, we have this consistent image of oneself, the projection of the moon, but what's really underneath shows when we're under pressure, or when we probe it, or when we explore it, or when we, you know, there's many different ways to access that subconscious material, or get beyond the defenses of the ego.
This seems like a simple question, but I've been recently thinking about this and actually kind of almost like wanting to think about this again for the first time, even though this has been a concept in my mind for many, many years. What is emotion? And
Well,
and the second part of the question, just to help clarify why I'm asking the question, is, you know, we know, of course, the emotion in general is the moon, and by association, the Trinity, Moon, Neptune, Pluto, as the emotional body itself. But you also speak about our emotions leaving the, you know, for example, Jeff Green taught with Uranus that roughly 80% of our impressions are linked to subconscious memories of the past. So we meet someone and we're going to have a reaction. It's not because of anything tangible occurring right now. It's something in the field of our memory that we are recalling. And that's like what you're saying. We can go somewhere where there's an astral imprinting even, and have a certain feel of something because we're in that environment. So energy remains and things are there. But all of this is like we're having an internal experience that ultimately points down to the projection of identity. Like we're someone, we think we're someone walking around here. And we know that's like a big part of the evolutionary astrology teaching, that evolution occurs through the integration of the emotional body. And there's like infinite wisdom in just that teaching, to the point where it's like really worth looking at again for the first time.
mm,
Because as a soul manifesting in this human experience, containing all these different koshas of memory, subconsciously influencing my perceptions, kind of working through the investigation of like, okay, here I am. What's the evolutionary signature, and how can I grow and work through this? And like, how is this all pointing back to my own evolutionary growth and taking responsibility for it all? We're having emotions. And as a human being now, I'm projecting an image of self. I have a sense of who I am, but it's all an image, it's all a projection. And that's necessary so that I can integrate experiences and allow it to further inform my understanding of who I am. But it feels so amorphous just because there's nothing in it that is actual. I guess you can ask like what is actual, but like there's the entire realm of emotion and self-identity is incredibly intangible, other than self-identity is that identity that we're projecting of ourselves. Like I don't know how to define it beyond that. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on this piece that I'm bringing forward.
well, you said you started with what is emotion.
Yeah.
Um, and And I would say, again, following that, the natural archetypes, right? So Taurus being sensate, um, Moon is feeling or emotion, right? Feeling belongs more to Venus, Taurus.
Yeah.
Emotion belongs more to Moon. So if we think of, well, what is our sensate body? It allows us, I had a passage from the history of the senses that says our senses break down, I'm going to paraphrase, reality into morsels that we can digest, right? So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
through the senses that we connect with here and now, space, that roots us here and now. Think Taurus, roots us here and now. Then we reach out, Gemini, right, with the mind and da da da, and then it comes back into the emotions. So when we think of the emotion is subjective experience that has a judgment attached to it, right? It has a subjective,
Yeah. It's totally subjective. Yeah.
right? Whereas feeling or sensate, right, our sensate self, um, has perhaps a discernment attached with it, such as a smell smells good or doesn't smell good or is repulsive or whatever, but it's not judgmental so much, right? It's not based, I'm not saying that that's a whole other discussion, that the sense is open to the emotional body, because they definitely do. But so to me, emotion is the part that gives us, just like the senses give us the ability to interact with the environment and to fully experience,
Mm.
in a lush way, right? To me, emotion is the same.
Mm.
Right. So, but it also comes with its baggage, right? It comes with its baggage because the emotional body, so closely correlated with the subconscious, you know, is rendering experience through a subjective lens that then is weighing and also retaining memory of other experiences, this life and others,
Right.
that then qualifies that experience,
Right.
right? Um, to make this simple and break it down, actually, because I work specifically with these subtle bodies in regression work, and it becomes very clear that to fully clear something out of the subtle bodies, and you hear the New Age movement talk about, actually, I find it funny that they say mind, body, spirit, and they skip emotions.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know, maybe it rolls off the tongue better. I don't know why it's like body, mind, spirit, but there's no emotions in there. Um, in order to fully rotor something or cathart something out of the psyche, to bring it to resolution, right back to that Saturn moon thing, one regresses back to, and I'm saying it's a natural movement of the psyche,
Yeah.
one regresses back to the initial wounding event
Yeah.
with all of the affect, right? We know that this is what forms or this is an affect or a manifestation of PTSD, is that somebody is doing this repetitively because the psyche is stuck in this repetition compulsion mode. But in regression work, and that's present life or past life, it doesn't matter. When a trauma has happened, the thing that we have lost in modern society is that the subtle bodies can become, and when you said what is the correlation to the astral plane, they can become fragmented,
Right.
right? We've all heard the terms from shamanism about fragmentation, soul loss. Those two correlate highly to Uranus and Neptune. Soul fragmentation, Uranus; Neptune, soul loss,
Hmm.
dissociation.
Hmm.
And fragmentation and dissociation go hand in hand. The point is that Uranus shows us that the psyche can be severed, that the subtle bodies can be misaligned, pieces can be torn out and shattered, right? So in regression work, the point is to go back into the experience with to fully go back into the experience physically, emotionally, and mentally, right? Which then realigns the subtle bodies in a way, because it's in a healing container. It's not like the PTSD replay that has no release of the impulse, right? But when it's in a healing container and it's re-experienced, it is the essence of soul retrieval. It literally realigns the dissociated, fragmented parts, and heals the subtle body, and then allows for the expression of the hidden impulse. So I'll give you a quick example. You're a child and father is abusive, and he breaks into your room maybe at night sometime and just, I don't know, beats you or something horrible that's terrifying to your little 5-year-old self. And part of you splits off. We know this happens, right? Even modern psychology knows this happens. Part of you splits off. That part doesn't come back. That is part of the subtle body splitting. This is what I'm talking about.
Right.
What happens in these moments and when PTSD forms is exactly when the body and the etheric body will experience the trauma. Father beats you. The mind, maybe the emotions go somewhere else. The emotions get buried. The
Okay.
impulse of the 5-year-old child would be what? Fight or flight. But you're 5 years old, so you can't, right? So the only defense is to freaking get out of there, is to split. But that splitting causes the fragmentation. So what happens is those parts don't come back on their own. And there's a schism in the subtle bodies. It's like a black band, because actually what's happened is that you have severed chronos, right? You've severed time. The body is experiencing one thing, the mind is off somewhere else, and the emotions are either numbing, defending, just whatever they're doing. All of those soul parts, or those subtle bodies, need to be realigned to heal the subtle bodies of this kind of rupture of time and space, right? And people talk about this in trauma. They're like, oh, I was up on the ceiling, or I went to grandma's house, or I was on the beach, or I went to the woods. There's these dissociative fantasies. This happens all the time in regression. And we know when we're dealing with it in regression that we're dealing with, again, Uranus, Neptune, fragmentation and dissociation. So one of the first ways to realign is to regress fully to that moment. There's like I said, the fight or flight frozen impulse is what causes the PTSD. It's an unfinished desire, right? Highly emotionally, mentally charged, unfinished desire that is buried within
And
the
you didn't have any outlet
subconscious.
for any kind of emotional, like this results in. So if the moon has to do with how we're necessarily needing to cope with each experience, that's going to create an emotional patterning because you can't express that fight or flight in that moment.
Well,
So
what I'm saying is it causes a fragmentation and splitting of the
yeah,
psyche, and most of the time a repression. But there can also, we have all these different defenses. Can
sure.
be denial, it can be compensation, it can be, but we all know PTSD, or trauma that condenses as PTSD, has certain characteristics, like amnesic memory or fragmentary memory. Again, it's because the subtle bodies each recorded something different happening in the same moment. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The physical body experienced, the physical etheric body experienced the pain. The mind didn't, because it went somewhere else, and the emotions did something else. So you got to bring the three of them back together in the direct re-experiencing of something, which is the first level of soul retrieval.
Right.
It's the first level of reintegrating the fragmented parts of the psyche.
And I imagine like the therapeutic challenge and component within that is we can't do that without having the appropriate Saturn moon dynamic. Like there needs to be a sort of non-defensive reality so that that individual can let that in, right? To be able to actually kind of go in that direction in the first place, one has to feel adequately safe
Yeah.
to even do that in the first, right? Because like you can't really do anything beyond the Saturn moon dimension.
Well, part of the difficulty is it's very hard to guide yourself through your own defenses. So you
Exactly
do
right.
need a skilled guide,
Right.
right?
Right. Absolutely.
And a safe container. And I mean, in my experience, I've been doing that specifically particular work, present and past life regression, for specifically healing this kind of fragmentation and dissociation we're talking about. I mean, it's not about, interested in who you were in past lives. It's
Right. Right. It's
specifically
healing.
for this, right?
Yeah.
And I get all kinds of people. I've had veterans of all the different wars. I've actually worked with World War II veterans, believe it or
Mm.
not, all the way through Afghanistan, etc., Vietnam, you name it. So very present life trauma like that, again, still causes it's the same fragmentation of the bodies. The point is, yes, somebody has to come to that work or want to do that work. It's not as painful as it sounds, though,
Yeah.
because the other part of it is, right, the reward, or more than the reward, the part of it is, like I said, the child who was abused by the father, who couldn't do anything, has the fight or flight impulse that is an unfinished piece of business. In regression, we redo all that, right? So once you align the physical bodies and you uncover the impulse that was there, that is the precious soul part that went away. That is, quite frequently, it's the child's innocence, or it's because this is what the psyche does, right? It takes its little treasured parts and tries to protect them, and sends them off somewhere, right? So we bring that back. That's why I'm saying that's the second part of soul retrieval. So the first is realigning the subtle bodies, and the second is getting the dissociated parts back, which are all of this beautiful, vital, I don't know, juicy, soul erotic energy. And when I say erotic, I mean eros, life force,
Yeah.
libidinal life force,
Yeah.
energy that comes back to somebody. And they get to act out what they couldn't do. They get to finish the unfinished impulse in the right context,
Right.
right? Because, as I always say, to the subconscious, everything is happening now. It
Right.
does not discern space and
Such a
time.
great statement. Yep.
So a 4-year-old who was abused and part fragmented, then there's a part of them that's still stuck there.
I mean, I'm
And to
just
the
so
subconscious, it's happening now, which is why somebody looks at them wrong and they immediately, they're 25 years old or 40 years old, and somebody looks at them wrong, like father used to, and they're immediately back into that 4-year-old self, yet in a traumatized way, not in a therapeutic way.
right. It's amazing how much the extent to which our lives are actually happening underneath the surface.
Oh, yeah. Well,
It just
remember the
blows me
iceberg? Remember the
mind-boggling, right?
iceberg model? I mean,
Sure.
really, here, most people are just here.
Yeah.
To me, this is where the juice is. The base of the iceberg is
And
where the
again, like
juice.
this fascination with just this inquiry, which maybe it's a little bit hard to grasp, like what is emotion? It just everything you just shared, it results in the completion of experience. And I love that
Well, it
statement that you gave at
results
the
in the completion of that repetition cycle, which
right,
is exactly what karma and reincarnation is. Now,
right, right.
because again, what is Uranus? The archetype of liberation. This is one thing I want to share with you and
Yeah.
whoever's watching this, because I do share this with my DMP students, because we know the microcosm reflects the macrocosm, right? And so if we can observe something in our psyche, we know that somehow it's part of the divine, this cosmological divine experience. So when I came into doing trauma work, one of my big questions was, who made up this idea that the psyche fragments? And I don't mean idea, I mean, like, why is this part of the divine plan?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, really? You couldn't come up with a better something? And in reading some, ancient knowledge, I came across several things. in Kabbalistic knowledge, which is, mystic Judaism, in Kabbalistic knowledge, there's this splitting that the creation story has to do with what's called the shattering of the
Right.
vessels. Do you know about this? The whole
Yeah.
creation of
Yeah.
the tree of life. And it's this shattering of the vessels that I just thought that I'm like, there's something to this, right? Then I came across the work of Peter Novak, who I will give you guys the title. It's The Division of Consciousness, The Lost Secret of Death. And this is going to go against what a lot of people have been taught to believe, but it's actually an ancient knowledge. At one time, and I'll bullet point it, at one time on the planet Earth, there was a universal belief pre-monotheism, pre-Judeo-Christianity, that we have more than one soul. It exists in shamanic traditions. It exists in some indigenous traditions. And one of the places we see it codified, where it came from its shamanic roots, is in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Tadol, and in the Egyptian Books of the Dead. So what were these ancient practices doing, which are actually shamanic practices? They were recognizing that when the soul, we'll say soul, because they would actually have different names for them, when the soul leaves the body, it divides, it splits. It's not this monotheistic picture that we have this one soul and it goes to heaven and hell or purgatory. That's the Christian version, right? that there are these different bodies. They were aware of the subtle bodies, and they were aware that the way to transcend, and this is the whole meaning of the Bardo Tadol, is how to transcend reincarnation, how to liberate Uranus, Aquarius, right, on the astral causal planes. It's in the Bardo Tadol, it's in the Egyptian Books of the Dead. The Ba, the Ka soul need to unite to become I think it's the Aum, the Amuka. I'm sorry, I'm missing the name right now. In other words, what they are saying is that one needs to unite the bodies in consciousness after death, right? To then experience the liberation that is part of the astral plane. But we miss it. So if you read the Tibetan Books of the Dead or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what they're talking about is that, we go to this lower bardo and the supernal light shows itself, but there's been either no practice or recognition that you are that Buddhic nature. And so it's literally just a flash and it's gone. And then you're traversing all these different bardos, right? But this is so the point being that this idea that there is this one soul, right, did not really come about until the Judeo-Christian monotheistic
That's really interesting.
understanding. And that in the Egyptian Books of the Dead, and I say Books of the Dead because it's not one text, it's literally what's written in the temples and on the coffins. They're instructions to the dead of how to unite the Ba and Ka soul after death.
And then the
It
bot
literally is like
are
saying,
these different than what you've been speaking about of just bringing together the different bodies?
that's exactly
Exact the
what
same.
they're
Okay.
talking about, though,
Yeah.
right? Like in the Bardo Tadol in Tibetan Book of the Dead, they're basically, the monks are sitting there reading this to the dying or recently deceased person, and they're basically saying, what we do in regression after the fact, right? To clean up all the mess of the other lives that didn't go to the light. They're basically saying, don't look back, don't worry about your wife, don't worry about your
Wow.
kids, don't
Wow.
think about your dog. They're doing that. They're basically
Yeah.
saying, these are your instructions,
Focus on.
resolve it now, get it over with, go to the supernal light, recognize that that's your Buddha nature, right? As well as, asking the deities for their mercy to receive that person.
I got a question for you. Okay. I'm personally very fascinated by the yugas. And the general cosmology that Sri Yukteswar definitely wrote about, of being a part of this, was a 24,000 year cycle where there's an arc of consciousness that's kind of going up.
26, yeah,
26, yeah.
yeah.
Half of it is going up, half of it's going down, and that according to most accounts we're definitely going up right now, so we're on the up arc. But I'm just very sort of fascinated about this relative to the trauma cycles and the patterns throughout the past several thousand years of history, and those that are kind of, what do you know and what can you speak about when it comes to souls from the most recent yuga, the golden age, which would be maybe 15,000 years ago ish, more or less. Is there some sort of, when consciousness here is at that point, which according to Yukteswar, that would be when our sun and the other sun are like right next to each other as a part of a binary star system. It doesn't mean doesn't mean that there's liberation, like everyone there is liberated, or can the cycle still continue? If you hear the question I'm asking.
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I would say that I think that the yuga cycles, it all depends on which teaching you follow, because that that's controversial about where we are, so on and so
Sure,
forth.
sure. But
Um,
it's not argued that you go back in history, all the pyramids, the structures, further back you go,
oh yeah, I know.
obviously we were more
No, but
advanced.
that's what I'm saying. I think we're in a de-evolutionary cycle, but
Okay,
I know
well,
they say
that
that
that aside,
Treta, what we're
here's the question
turning
I'm
into
asking.
the,
I'll clarify
is
it
it
better for you.
is it Treta Yuga? Is that the one that we're supposedly turning up
No,
into?
we would still be in Dwapara, which is like the one
Okay,
after the lowest.
okay,
But here's
yeah.
the question. I'll clarify it better. Um, I think about, for example, you do past life regression work and you combine that with evolutionary astrology. I give a lot of readings. You can see the core karmic soul dynamics in the chart. A lot of clients that I work with, they've had regressions or they have memories, whatever. And everything that I ever hear about more or less makes sense because history has been pretty difficult for quite a while. But
At least the
what I
last
what I'm
5,000 years.
right. And what I'm curious about is, in our soul evolution here on in this earth human experience, and I'm not saying like I need an answer, but there's just like a curiosity that I just want to hear what you have to say about it. Things I think about. Coming back from the time on this planet when we were at a golden age,
Mm.
souls that were around then, um, are some of those souls then continuing on to then have been a part of this earth experience in later ages, during the medieval ages when everything sucked, but then
Yeah, I think
because they
so. I
missed the
think that
liberation during that last golden age and they are
I
still
don't know
part
if
of the
it was
cycle.
I don't know. I mean, I can't say with any certainty, but I can speculate with you. So
Yes.
let's just give it that qualification. I would say that, I understand evolution as a process of involution and evolution, right? And so, I've used before uh, an analogy of which I believe was one of the mystic teachings of Christ, when the prodigal son, right? The parable of the prodigal son, as an illustration of that, where the prodigal son was in the father's house and had everything that he wanted, and it was all great and loving, and and then he went out into the world and squandered everything,
Right.
right? And blah blah blah, and went out and drank and slept with women and spent all his father's money and did whatever that, and one son stayed home. And then the prodigal son comes home and the father welcomes him back completely. Um, and then, there's the whole thing. The other son is pissed off, like, why would you do that? Blah, blah. Okay, so this is the journey of the individuated spark, the monad, right? Spirit individuates, again, Uranus individuates from totality of consciousness, right? We can do the reverse wheel. So we could say we are all Piscean at one point in the cosmic amniotic fluid, right? We're in the cosmic amniotic womb. And then, we sever in different ways. We sever through Aries, but we also sever through Aquarius, moving in that direction, right? And so that severing then that happens is part of the divine plan, but it's the involution, it's the turning away from the divine.
Mm.
But you remember, if you're first turning away from the divine, perhaps the memory of the divine is still very
Mm-hmm.
fresh with you, right? So to me, I would say in my own possibility that these earlier ages where we were distinctly more spiritual, right, and more in tune, may have to do with that this was still in that process of actually fully incarnating, right? Like, we can go back to Lemurian, Atlantis, and so on and so forth, that it's a progressive appropriation of what does physicality mean, how far away can we move from the divine before we finally wake up and turn back on the path of evolution. And that is what involution and evolution is, right? So that turning away process is to forget the Father's house, right, and get lost in all of the material.
It really
I
brings
think
up that
that's I think that's a highly progressive thing. It's not a sudden, right? So these earlier civilizations could be something like that. We were still involuted, right?
I hear that,
And
right?
then there's this getting lost in the miasma that's here and forgetting, right? Until, and they talk about this in theosophy, until this lifetime where somebody kind of goes, after these long cycles of incarnation, goes, wait a minute, there must be more than this.
Right.
And in that moment turns the wheel, and instead of moving away from the divine, starts the process of evolution. And it becomes progressively more conscious as one goes on one's spiritual healing path
Mm-hmm.
through a series of lifetimes where one is evolving back to the divine.
Yeah, I mean, it just brings up that same question you brought up before, which is why does all this happen, right? Why even that turning away process?
Well,
Whenever I
for the
contemplate,
divine to experience itself. I
yeah, I
mean,
mean,
to me,
that's
that
conceptual though for
sits
me,
well
right?
with me, you
When
know?
there's like the philosophical conceptual answer, right? But when I actually ask myself this question, I don't have an answer because nothing, like the only thing that I'm directed towards is right now, am I gonna like basically what am I gonna do right now? It's like I do I have a choice in the matter? Do I want to resist or cooperate with the evolutionary potential of my life?
Mm.
That's where I go. It's like, do you want happiness? Like, okay, I'm not gonna answer that question. Like that's kind of where I'm taken. There's so much, it's rare for me to have these talks because I usually just kind of regard the things that I don't understand with sort of peaceful, like I'll know it when it's time to know it. So I appreciate these chats and these conversations, and
Well,
I do really respect your experience and your knowledge and just having dived deeply into these realms. um, I want everyone to know Patricia Walsh will be speaking at the upcoming EA conference. And will you give us a brief minute or two synopsis of what is the topic that you're going to be teaching on?
well, I am going to be talking about the dynamics because, when we do evolutionary astrology readings, we go very deep, as you know, we can. Um, and so what I'm going to be laying out are some of these dynamics of what are you actually dealing with when you uncover these sorts of things in the human psyche, and how is the human psyche structured
Mm,
as it relates to trauma and evolution and karma and all of those things. So my topic would be more like a whirlwind tour through the human psyche and how best to serve it, or how, understanding the terrain gives one the ability to serve it better,
mm.
with the tool of evolutionary astrology.
I have one more question for you, Patricia. I want to hear what your thoughts are on this. The idea of spiritual bypassing didn't exist until recently, and maybe for much of spiritual history, quote unquote, bypassing was happening, but there wasn't a social framework for even understanding that reality. And now we understand this. We understand how we can dissociate and kind of ignore other realms and kind of go into more of the spiritual dimension, but not deal with our own issues. And so we have a new framework, a whole vocabulary and a psychological vocabulary to explain and understand these things, and then people like yourself are kind of taking the ancient teachings and actually be able to bring it and kind of reframe it within the context of what we know now. I want to hear open-ended, in 100 years, what do you imagine we'll be thinking of and seeing that we just currently haven't allowed or realized within our existing framework of reality when it comes to these matters? You can be very creative in your answer.
Well, we'd be in Pluto tap Cancer Leo around then again, wouldn't we?
Will we? Maybe.
A
Maybe.
100 years. I'm just trying to imagine um, what the second turn of Pluto Leo Cancer might look like,
Right.
right? What we know of it now and what it might look like then. I, gosh, I couldn't even, what do you imagine? It's so hard to think about what, because
Pluto
I
and
have
Taurus on
certain,
the south node. Okay, me answering this question. Um,
I mean, 100 years in the huge cycle is not really a lot, but in human
it's a
evolution and
lot
with
right now
the,
for us though,
it's
because
a lot right now for us.
yeah,
Yeah, right. I
I think
mean,
100 years
for
now is
us,
very
it's a
different than
lot.
100 years then. Here's my answer. I think obviously it's beyond what we can imagine in the same way that we couldn't have imagined the things that we're thinking of now. But when I just kind of feel into what's remaining in our human evolution, it's definitely a more holistic and embodied unity of psyche and earth, psyche and nature. And I think maybe there's going to be more of a grounded knowledge or understanding of who we are that isn't so separate from our relationship to nature. Whereas we can have these scholastic conversations and do healing work, see healers, but it's not quite integrated in how we live as a society. So I think there's going to be more and more movement towards an actual way. Like, it's going to fit more into the Capricorn
Yeah,
dimension.
I hope that happens
I think it's
within.
inevitable eventually.
Well, I would say we're moving towards that. I just hope it happens sooner than 100 years. But
Well, since
to
I threw the
me,
number out,
I
just so
look
you
at that
know,
as like that's a real potentiality with Pluto and Aquarius and into Pisces, right?
mhm,
I mean,
yeah,
to me, it's a real potentiality for us to really make that. And again, we were talking about Uranus. Thought creates reality, right? That was a new age thought from the
yeah,
70s, right? Seth is the one that brought that, Jane Roberts and Seth
mm,
brought that into
I didn't
the
know that.
new age, or the foundations of the new age back then. And I think the real tangible experience of that is a potential Pluto Aquarian experience,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
So once we get into that magical place of synchronicity, right, where we know it, but we're talking about, let's imagine that some consensus people get that,
right.
right? When it becomes more and more reality, then imagine where that goes,
Well,
right?
just so you know, this random 100-year date that I threw out there actually has Pluto exactly conjunct the South Node at 27 and 26 degrees Taurus.
Oh, it's Taurus then,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. See?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense, right? So 100 years from now, it might be about a
Pluto will be exactly
reunification.
where Uranus is right now, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're on. Who knows? Nothing's random. Patricia,
Oh,
thank you
again,
for.
speaking of Uranus,
There you go. Exactly, exactly.
thought creates reality.
Let's check back in then. Thank you for taking this time to share your knowledge and reflections on these matters of the astral plane, working with these different bodies and understanding these mechanics. For everyone watching, once again, not for those who aren't watching, because you don't hear me,
Because you won't be
the
watching.
Evolutionary Astrology Conference is this October, and Patricia will be one of 15 lecturers. You can learn more and sign up for that in the description below. Thank you all for watching.